If your legs feel weaker walking upstairs than they did 5 years ago, you're not imagining it. Research on aging suggests older adults can lose muscle strength at a rate of around 3% every single year after 60. That number sounds small until you feel it in your knees on the third flight. But there's a small, cheap food sitting in most kitchens that may be quietly working against that decline. This one's for anyone over 60 who's noticed their legs don't quite feel like they used to, and honestly, it's for anyone who's paused at the bottom of a staircase for half a second before going up, just to brace for it. If that sounds familiar, even a little, stay with this one. Picture a fairly normal morning. You get out of bed, and for the first several steps, your legs feel stiff, almost like they need convincing before they'll cooperate properly. A few years ago that feeling disappeared after a couple of steps, now it lingers a little longer. And because legs carry your full body weight with every single step, they're usually the first place this kind of change becomes noticeable, long before it shows up anywhere else. It's easy to brush this off as just getting older, and in some ways, that's true, but what's actually happening underneath is more specific than that. Muscle tissue in the legs naturally starts breaking down faster than the body rebuilds it, bone density quietly drops, and the minerals that let muscles fire correctly become harder to maintain through diet alone. None of that shows up as a diagnosis. It shows up as hesitation at the top of the stairs, or needing the armrest to stand up from a low chair. That quiet loss of confidence is something a lot of people go through without ever saying it out loud. The food we're talking about today is the fox nut, also called Makhana, or sometimes lotus food. It's inexpensive, it's usually just roasted or lightly popped, and it's been sitting in kitchens across South Asia for generations, mostly as a light snack or something given to people recovering from illness. Here's the part most people skip past, though. The reason it may matter specifically for your legs has less to do with the food itself, and more to do with a mineral most people never think about, until they're wide awake at 2 a.m. with a calf cramp that won't quit. And no, this doesn't mean overhauling your entire diet. Usually, it's just a small roasted handful. Let's start with the most direct connection, since it's the one most research keeps coming back to. After 60, the body naturally starts breaking down muscle faster than it rebuilds it. Researchers call this process sarcopenia, and legs tend to be affected first, simply because they carry the most weight, every single day, without exception. Every time you stand up, walk to the kitchen, or climb a single step, your leg muscles are doing more work than almost any other muscle group in your body. Fox nuts contain a fairly meaningful amount of plant protein for such a light snack, and protein is essentially the raw material the body uses to repair and maintain that muscle tissue. Research on aging and muscle health consistently points to protein intake as one of the more modifiable factors in slowing this decline, not reversing it, not stopping it completely, but slowing it down in a way that adds up over months and years, not days. This matters just as much for someone who still walks daily as it does for someone who's become more sedentary. Muscle maintenance isn't only relevant once a problem has already shown up. Not overnight. Over time. That's the muscle side of things. But muscle only works properly when the signals telling it what to do are working too, which brings up something a lot of people never connect to diet at all. Quick question. Have you ever wondered why some people get calf cramps in the middle of the night and others almost never do? A lot of it comes down to two minerals, magnesium and potassium. Both play a direct role in how muscles contract and then release properly, and fox nuts happen to contain a decent amount of each. Some studies looking at magnesium levels in older adults have linked lower intake to a higher likelihood of muscle cramps and general weakness, though researchers are still working out exactly how much of that effect comes from diet alone versus other factors like hydration or medication. If this sounds like a lot of science for one small food, that's fair. The point isn't that fox nuts are unique in having magnesium or potassium, plenty of foods do. The point is that this happens to be one of the easiest, cheapest ways to get a bit of both without any prep. That 2 a.m. cramp we mentioned earlier? This is usually where it actually starts. Muscles, though, don't work in isolation, they need a solid frame to pull against, and that frame is your bones. This is where fox nuts do something a little different from most snack foods. They provide calcium and phosphorus, two minerals the body relies on to maintain bone density. Bone density naturally declines with age, especially after 60, and weaker bones in the legs and hips are part of why falls become more serious later in life, not just more common. Think about how much day-to-day independence depends on legs that don't give out, getting to the mailbox, getting in and out of a car, playing with a grandchild on the floor without worrying about getting back up. To be clear, a handful of fox nuts isn't a substitute for calcium-rich meals, weight-bearing exercise, or a doctor's advice on bone health specifically. But it can be one small piece that fits alongside those things, rather than replacing any of them. This is also part of why physical therapists tend to talk about bone health and leg strength together instead of as two separate topics, one holds up the other. There's also a quieter factor working in the background, one that doesn't get talked about as much: inflammation. Low-grade inflammation tends to build up gradually as we age, and it's been associated with slower muscle recovery and stiffer joints, the kind of stiffness that makes getting up off the floor feel like a bigger production than it used to be. This is part of why some people notice their knees or ankles feel different from one day to the next, even when nothing about how they're using them has actually changed. Stiff joints in the morning aren't just an inconvenience. For a lot of people, they're the first sign that something needs attention. Fox nuts contain a plant compound called camphorol, an antioxidant that some research suggests may help the body manage oxidative stress over time. It's worth being honest here, this isn't a dramatic effect, and it won't undo years of wear on your joints on its own. But small, consistent choices like this tend to be exactly what long-term research on aging keeps pointing toward, not one fix, but layers of small support stacking on top of each other, quietly, over years. One more detail, and it's one people usually don't expect. Fox nuts have a relatively low glycemic index, meaning they don't spike blood sugar the way a lot of packaged snacks do. Why would that matter for your legs specifically? Because the nerves that control leg muscles are sensitive to long-term blood sugar swings, and steadier blood sugar is generally linked to better nerve function over time. This is especially relevant for anyone already managing blood sugar levels, though it's always worth checking with a doctor first if you're on medication, since individual situations vary quite a bit. It's a small detail, but small details are usually what separate a food that's genuinely useful from one that just sounds impressive in a headline. None of these 5 things work alone, that's really the point. Here's the part that tends to surprise people the most, and it's not what you'd expect. This isn't some new discovery dressed up for a video. Fox nuts have been given to older adults, to new mothers, and to people recovering from illness in South Asian households for generations, long before anyone measured their magnesium content in a lab or wrote a study about camphorol. The tradition came first. The research is really only catching up now to explain what people already seem to notice on their own, without needing a peer-reviewed paper to tell them. It's a pattern that shows up with a lot of traditional foods. Actually, the practice sticks around for generations before science gets around to asking why. That's usually how it works with food, more often than we give it credit for. So if there's one point out of everything we've covered that's worth holding on to, it's this: fox nuts aren't doing just one job for your legs, they're supporting 3 separate systems at the same time. The muscle tissue itself, through protein. The bone structure underneath that muscle, through calcium and phosphorus. And the mineral balance that lets the whole system actually fire correctly, through magnesium and potassium. Most snacks touch maybe one of those, if any. It's genuinely rare to find something this simple that touches all 3 at once, in a low-calorie, low-effort way that doesn't require cooking or planning. It's the kind of combination most food marketing skips right over, since it's easier to sell one nutrient at a time than to explain how several work together. Remember that number from the start of this video, the idea that strength can decline by around 3% every year after 60? That number doesn't come from one missing nutrient. It comes from years of small gaps adding up quietly in the background: a little less protein here, a little less magnesium there, a little more inflammation than the body can fully manage. Which means the fix, if you want to call it that, was never going to be one dramatic change either. It was always going to be small, boring, repeatable things. That's the part worth remembering, more than any single number or study. If any of this was useful, subscribing genuinely helps. It tells this channel to keep breaking down everyday foods like this without the hype and without pretending anything is magic. And I'm actually curious about something. Do you already eat fox nuts regularly, or would this be the first time trying them? Type already do or trying this in the comments below. I genuinely read through them, and it helps to know which one most people are starting from. And if you're thinking this sounds like just another random health snack to add to a growing list, fair thought. This one's cheap, it's usually already sold at most grocery stores or Indian markets, and it doesn't need any prep beyond roasting for a few minutes. It also keeps well once you have a bag in the pantry, so it's a low-effort one to actually try instead of just bookmark. If this kind of breakdown was helpful, the next video looks at a common morning habit that might be quietly draining your energy by early afternoon, which is worth watching if you've ever hit a wall around 2 p.m. and couldn't figure out why. So, in one line, legs don't fail all at once, they fade quietly, and small, cheap habits like this one are part of how people push back against that fade. A small handful of fox nuts isn't going to turn back the clock on its own, but it might be one quiet, small thing working steadily in the background while everything else you're already doing does the heavier lifting. And sometimes, that combination is exactly the kind of change that actually lasts.